We're back on Buckeye Talk. The final Ohio State player taken in the 2021 NFL Draft goes in the 7th round. It was Jonathon Cooper with the 239th overall pick. He goes to the Denver Broncos, who you might remember selected Baron Browning at the end of the 3rd round back on Saturday. And Stephen, this was a guy that we were hearing coming out of Pro Day. He's the one who said teams are looking at him as an outside linebacker. I still don't know if that makes a lot of sense athletically, but I think versatility, if he can show it in some way, is probably his best chance to make a roster, as his 7th round selection would suggest.
I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's going to work because I'd be lying to you. I will say that because Denver Broncos run a 3-4, it's a good place to at least try it to see if it works. It's not going to work. I know that for a fact. But listen, if he wants to try that out just because from an athletic standpoint, he's just not the prototypical defensive end. You go to a place that's running a 3-4 that gives you the best possible chance to do that. Good luck to him and whatnot, but I don't think this is something that's going to work out. He's never played linebacker before, and yeah, he had a good year last year, but you also have to put it in context of he could have had that exact same year. The problem wasn't his year, was that guys like Zach Harrison and Tyreek Smith didn't take the type of step that we would expect from guys like that to take. So it's a good year only because everybody around him who should have had better years didn't do that.
Doug, put his career in context just because, he came in as a top 50 recruit, a 5-star guy, local guy for the Columbus area, and a guy who was always considered a very high character guy, was not really considered a high impact guy, and then had that impact this year.
Yeah, he's a top 50 national recruit. He's not that much lower than Nick Bosa in that recruiting class when he gets here. They're kind of like a tandem in a lot of ways. And then they obviously diverged. That he rallied and had the kind of year from a production standpoint in terms of helping his team in 2020 is a great story. But I think if anybody got fooled by exactly what that meant for what kind of, natural talent he was, or what kind of football player he was at the NFL level, he's just not. So I underestimated what his impact would be on the 2020 Ohio State Buckeyes. I think maybe some people then overestimated, based off what he did in 2020, what it meant for him as an NFL player. Jashon Cornell got picked in the 7th round last year. Jashon Cornell was another guy who was like a borderline 5-star recruit at Ohio State. Just kind of had an okay career helping him out. Went out with his best year as a senior. Went in the 7th round, but I think at times during this season, I felt bad for like underestimating Jonathon Cooper. And it's like, oh, did we wrong on this guy? And Steven makes a great point that he had to do this. He had the opportunity to be their most productive defensive end in 2020 because some of the other guys, because there wasn't a Chase Young on the roster, and there wasn't a Nick Bosa, and there wasn't a Sam Hubbard or a Tyquan Lewis, and Zach Harrison and Tyreek Smith weren't quite up to that level of play. So I do think it's a reminder that Zach Harrison and Tyreek Smith need to raise their level, because these are guys that we think project maybe as top 3 rounds in an NFL draft. And they played many fewer snaps last season than a guy who just went in the 7th round. Why is that? You need to do more in 2021 because we think you probably have more talent as a football player and you're a more attractive draft prospect. So you need to contribute more to your team in 2021.
Yeah, 24 tackles, 3.5 for loss, and 3.5 sacks per game. Those are great numbers if that's your second best defensive end doing that, which if you look at the 2018 season, when he was their second best defensive end, 25 tackles, 6.5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks, alongside a guy who had 10 sacks that season. That's when that should be a bonus, but it shouldn't be what your leading guy has at Ohio State.
And that's over 8 games. If you extrapolate it over 14,
right,
it's different. But your point is taken. And I think it does also should, kind of building off what you're saying, Doug, the country is used to seeing the NFL draft include Ohio State defensive ends, Ohio State defensive line talent going high. They had a 4th rounder today in Tommy Togiai, and then they have Jonathon Cooper in the 7th round. I think that has to change next year, probably for this defense to reach its potential and for Ohio State to reach its potential. I think the guys you're talking about have to prove themselves worthy of being taken high in this draft. I think Haskell Garrett coming back for his extra senior year needs to prove himself worthy of being taken relatively high in this draft. I think if that happens, I think this defense potentially improves over where it was in 2020.
And that's the thing. There's enough people, you just mentioned Haskell Garrett. We're talking about Zach Harrison, Tyreek Smith, Teron Vincent, a former 5-star top 10 player in the country. Can he break out next year? So there's enough to maybe offset the fact that you didn't have it in the 2021 class, where the 2022 class, you might see 2 or 3 guys, 2, 3, 4 guys go in the top 100.
4 Big Ten defensive ends went ahead of Jonathon Cooper. Kwity Paye was a guy that got a lot of attention, first rounder. Odafe Owe, Jason Owe from Penn State, first round guy. Like Ernest Brown from Northwestern. I don't know who that is. And they played Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game. I apologize. He went ahead of Jonathon Cooper. He was drafted ahead of any Ohio State defensive end. That's not what Ohio State defensive ends are all about. So it's a reminder of what they need to do in 2021.
But even some guys who had bigger, like isn't Shaka Toney, wasn't he selected pretty late? There were some other guys in the Big Ten who had some names attached to them who were also going in the 7th round. So that tells you that it's not just your college production, obviously, and this is a reminder of that as we get annually. So,
well, I would say I think Shaka Toney is an interesting guy, but to me, Shaka Toney he went in the 7th round. He went right a few picks. He went 7 picks after Jonathon Cooper.
Mm-hmm.
Shaka Toney was a try-hard guy. I think actually Shaka Toney is actually a decent comparison for Jonathon Cooper. And that's when it was when Ohio State was playing Penn State, it was they had Shaka Toney and they had Jason Owe. And it was one of these guys is a really athletic guy who's still trying to learn defensive end. The other guy is knows how to play it, but he's more limited athletically. And it's well, that should be the difference between Penn State and Ohio State, right? That Penn State had 2 guys who neither of them were the total package. Ohio State usually has the defensive end who is the total package. Instead, we're in a place where Shaka Toney was very similar to the most productive Ohio State defensive end of 2020.
So Ohio State ended up having 10 picks. Cooper was the final of those 10 picks. That's the 2nd year in a row that they've had 10 picks. The only program in the country that did that. I think it's 3 of the last 5 years they've had at least 9 picks. So not a top heavy draft for Ohio State, but a deep draft, getting into double digits. Not a bad weekend for them from that perspective. So that wraps up our little quick reactions, but come listen to the Buckeye Talk podcast. It'll be going up here as soon as possible. And try the text. We were texting all weekend about the NFL draft. 614-350-3315. Get a 2-week free trial. You get Ohio State news analysis straight to your phone 7 days a week. I'm Nathan Baird for Doug Lesmerises and Stephen Means. That was Buckeye Talk.